All right, guys. So as you know, our first video, at the intro to this, we set up our test fixture. We set up a clutch on it. So we tested it, and here's the conclusions from today's testing. The first series we ran on the 12 mil Tech and polyester jacketed runner twin, which is a very grippy rope designed for use in clutches. The first test, we discovered something nice. At only 765 newton meters of force, 765 kilos of force, the clamps were tightened to 10 newton meters onto the tube. And we pulled and we got to 765 and the clamp slipped. And the fixture was a little cockeyed because it's pulling, we discovered that it's pulling from the rear of the clutch, because the way the jaws lock here, things this long, the jaws lock back here, it tends to kick the apparatus up. So what happened was, it's an 8mm plate between two clamps, and the clutch is bolted to that. This clutch is kind of an odd one, and it just was set up to run on a center line of the cord, so it had tapped threaded holes in it, not through holes. And what we did was we pulled the 8mm bolt out of the aluminum, tapped threaded holes on the leverage point. So we stopped the test at 765, 8mm. Now bolt spec, when you look these up, should be as deep for full strength, 1.5 times the thread diameter. So an 8mm bolt could hold its threads at 12mm depth, but it's only an 8mm plate, so it's only holding its diameter. And it pulled, you can see the hole is ovaled. It ripped it forward, up, and out as it cantilevered the clutch. So we learned that you got a through bolt, and as the specs call, when you use the spin lock clutches, you have to through bolt them with backing plates. In our case, a backing plate would be a washer and a nut, and that way you can't do that. So we learned that. The second test was again with the twin runner, and we went to 1390, and the clamps, 1390 kilos, the clamp slipped. And what happened was, when we look at the rope, the initial pull up to over 1,000 stretches the jacket and stretches everything and tightens the jaws significantly. So you end up with about 25mm, this was the mark, you end up with about 25mm outside the front of the clutch holding. Then the clutch locks in pretty good. The rope gets very flattened out. And what we did notice was when it did slip, you can see the jacket's shaved here and the jacket's shaved here. And those two spots here and here are the two different tests we did. And what happens is it slips not due to the rope giving, but what happens is it takes the jaws and they cut fibers off the jacket until the valleys of the jaws are loaded up with fuzz. And once their compacted fuzz is in there, they become smooth. They're not jaws anymore, they're just smooth because they're filled with rope fibers, and then it slips. And once it slips, it will not re-engage. It just slips completely across the fibers, and you can feel it in the jacket. Now this rope is designed for abrasion, so it hasn't hurt the jacket. You'd still be able to use this, no problem. But it has filled and loaded the jaws enough with the fibers on this to where it no longer holds in the clutch, and that's at 1390. Now the clamps were tightened to 20 newton after the first and second. We went 10 and 20, and at 20 newton meters they slipped minorly. At 30 newton meters on the third test we went to 1190 before the rope slipped. And at 30 newton meters, we had no clamp slippage. So at 20 newton meters, we had about 5 mil of rope or of clamp slippage. And that was at 1390. Third test at 1190, the same situation with the rope. It progressively flattens out between the jaws, and as the jaws start eating away the material, it slips. But at 30 newton meters, which is basically reefing it down pretty tight onto your truss, no slippage whatsoever. So at 30 newton meters, clamps don't go anywhere, and the only mitigating factor is the clutch. To continue testing, what we did is we got some Twaron rope, which is made by Marlowe. I picked up as a sailing rope for high heat. A very similar jacket construction to the Glystein, And what we do is it's 11 millimeter, not 12, and we used it, and it did virtually the same thing at 975 kilos, no clamp slippage. We had, from the mark, we had the stretch at the jacket, or of the seating of the jacket and the inner fibers. It gets a little skinny and about 25 mil sticks out of the clutch. And at that point it locks in, but what we ended up with was the same chewing up of the rope, shaving the fibers off that are on the jacket. Now again, the jacket's not damaged. It just takes any of the fuzz off, anything that's hanging over until it loads up and it cuts loose. And that was at 975 on an 11 millimeter rope. As a control, I just wanted to see what a straight polyester would do with none of the new fibers in the jacket. I didn't have great expectations. And what we found was I took some 12 mil static line. I think this is some old Yale rope. And we loaded it. It slipped and stretched because it's polyester. It's got about 5% stretch. It's static line. It pulled about 35 to 40 millimeters out of the clutch from the jaws as it's seated. And the jaws clamped and clamped and clamped. And then at 1,000 kilos, it stripped the jacket. And you can see the jaws were clamped. And in fact, the polyester is melted in the jacket here. So I'm thinking on polyester jackets, it's going to melt before it breaks, whether that's over a Dyneema core or that's, in this case, a polyester core. But it melted the polyester and the polyester broke at 1,000 kilos. Now this is static line. I didn't have any huge expectations for strength, but I was hoping to get above what we got last time, which was 1390 and 1190. We made it to 1,000, and this is 12 millimeter rope. Actually 12.4, I think this is a US rope, so it's 12.4 millimeter. So it's slightly bigger than the 12. I was just trying to get a size selection and see if that made any difference. So what we find is you can't get to the 1500 they're rated at least I can't in an informal test here, because with the ceramic jaws, once they load up, they slip. Secondarily, your plates all have to be through bolted. And your clamps should, if you're going to use them as anchors, need to be reefed down fairly tight. Not enough to damage your truss, but at the loads we saw there at 1,390 kilos, we saw no slippage with 3 newton meters, or 30 newton meters force. Sorry, 30 newton meters of force. And I measured that with the torque wrench, so I know that they're pretty accurate. And I'm going to try to correlate that with the wing nut wrench that everybody uses on the wing nuts on these things. But that's pretty, it's like pretty gorilla tight, 30 newton meters. Not enough to damage the truss, not enough to flex the clamp, but it definitely does not slide. Now the other question is, can you get away with 20 newton meters and have it butted up against a cross member so it just can't slide? And then that way it'll pull without sliding any farther. I don't know how much that will damage the truss. That's a test for another day. But that's what we found out today. They're rated at 50. The clutches are rated at 1,500. We couldn't get to that with any of our ropes here today. And that's even with accurate center lines on things. Just the way the clutch works. It's a tooth device. It's a cam device, and it has ceramic jaws, and they do affect the rope. And once they load up with fibers, they're done. And once it slips, once the fibers have filled the grooves, it will not reset. You have to clean it out and start all over again. So that's what we found out today. So when you're planning on your holding forces, currently the clamps appear to be okay. You have to tighten them down fairly heavily, 20 to 30 newton meters, depending on your load. And they won't slip. And the bolts don't shear. None of the devices moved, but you can't put them in tapped threaded plate holes, at least into the plates mounted to the clamps. Now, if it's mounted directly to the clamps, we will be testing that on the gold tails because it's a 12 mil bolt. It's 18 mil into straight aluminum on the clamps, and they're through bolted. So, they're in a dowdy that uses a hex nut. So they're not going to pull through either, but that's a different story, and we'll see what we can pull on that. I'm expecting super high results because the clamps won't slip. More, I expect to see a clamp blow apart, if anything. Anyway, that's for today with clutches. So that was our fuck around and find out with clutches. All right, take care. Hey folks, so what we did was we fit these first so that they were at the correct height. And then we torqued the nuts to 10 Newton meters in terms of tightness on the clamp nuts, which is about as tight as you're going to get them with a wing nut. And it was a fairly arbitrary, because I could reef on them now that I have a nut and a big long torque wrench, but there's no reason. They dial out at 10 Newton meters. So that's what we're sticking with. And we're going to put it in the device, and then it'll be clamped up. I have to tighten the bolts and collars. We'll feed the rope through here. We'll hook the other end to our pulling cylinder and measure if it slips. We're going to put marks, witness marks here and a witness mark on the rope. And then we're going to pull it and see what the dyno reads before it slips, or if it slips or not, or where it moves, right? So that'll be next. So here's a view of our setup. The piece is mounted in here. It's set in the dyno. The dyno's at peak load. The rope has been pulled through and the clutch locked. Twin runner rope. You can see the dynamic core here. This is an 8mm plate on top of 2 clamps. The clamps are torqued to 10 Newton meters. I've marked the line where the front leading clamp is, and I've marked the line on the clutch with the front of the body of the clutch, so we can see any slippage there. I'm going to bring it up to tension and start reading the tensions and watching and observing. And that's how we're going to test this and just see about these clamps. And we'll see how high we can go with them. I may put a leash on it after the initial pull to see what I'm thinking, and go from there. All right? On this test, we've put new bolts through, and they're backed with nuts. We've elevated the nose, so when this goes under tension, it's in level. And on the other side, we've elevated the cylinder slightly with a plate so that everything's pulling in line. I'm going to take some tension up on it and see where we get to this time. That's 620 already. You've noticed here we have some slippage. The initial stretch or jack of the rope going through the jaws until they lock down, because the harder you pull, the more they clamp together. So in order to set the jaws, it takes that far. We're at 620 kilos. The clamps have not slipped. And you'll notice we're at 1230, and the rope is stretching in the jaws now. It's getting much thinner here in front of the jaws. We're at 12. The clamps have slipped. I'll be able to check a small amount, just I can't see the black line anymore. I'm going to take it to 1500 if I can. And it slipped at 1390 in the jaws. You saw that? We'll try it again. And now it's slipping all the way through the jaws with them locked. So we'll take the clutch apart now and have a look at what the issues are. All right, we're going to pull again. We've got it marked. We're at 50 kilo force to seat the rope. We've had to block things up accordingly because of the center lines. Now we're in a straight shot. We're going to try it again. We're through bolted on the plate. We've marked the slippage, and we're going to keep pulling and see where we get to this time. It slipped at 1180 that time on the same rope. You heard it go clunk, and we've got .30 millimeters of slippage on the jacket in the tightening of the clutch, and we'll see where we get if we get any higher. Nope, it's filled the, so once it slips, we're done, and that was at 1180. So what we found now is the rope has flattened. That's where it was clamped in the jaw and slipped. And it's hard. It will come back to shape once we fluff it out. But that was at its peak loading of 1,340. We didn't make it to 1,500. which is what they're rated at. So that's a real world example. The clutch stayed fixed. The jaws appear good and aligned. We're going to go inside and have a look and inspect and see if the jaws have chipped on the ceramic. But otherwise, everything's been fine. It slipped overall about 30 millimeter through the jaws before we got to 1390 where it popped. And that's where it cut loose at 1390 and it gave us 30 millimeters of full slack. What we found on inspecting the clutch is the rope jacket was peeling. There's a Technora jacket with the Technora jacket on the rope. And what it was doing was peeling the fibers off and filling the jaws so that when it finally clamped or finally released on the clamping, the jaws are full of jacket, as you can see. And that once they filled up, that's when it slipped. So that's what happened on that. At 1390, the jaws filled up with jacket that it had cut off or cheese grated off in the ceramic jaws, filled up the ridges, and we cleaned the fuzzle out of the top. We haven't cleaned the fuzzle out of the bottom. We will now clean it and go again. You'll also notice when I loosened the clamps, they slid 8 millimeter between the two marks at 20 Newton meters of force tension in the clamps at 1390, so 1.4 tons. So we had slippage at 1.4 tons. We lost 10 mil here, and we had about 30 mil in the rope diameter as the diameter pulled tight and decreased and flattened out. And as that happened, this is what we got, this thinning portion where it shaved the rope and peeled the jacket. It has not broken the jacket, it just shaved it. Notice it's shiny here and fuzzy here. It's taken the fuzz off of it and filled the jaws until they slipped. Okay? Again, what's happened, the rope has gone flat. It's gone from a round rope. It slipped 30 millimeters. It's flattened. You can see where the jaws have marked it, the tension, and it has slipped, and it has shaved the fuzz off the jacket, and once more filled the jaws with rope. So once the jaws, and it slips 30 millimeters, it fills the jaws up with this jacket. The rope becomes flat. And then it slips. And this is 12 mil rope, Dyneema 99 core, SK99 core with a Technora jacket and polyester 50-50 over it. That's what we currently are running. And you'll see that that's what happens here, this flatness. Now we can get it out. It goes back to being round, but also the jacket has been abraded. You notice the section here between this, and this. The jaws, the ceramic jaws that abraded the jacket and basically shaved the fibers off until they filled the jaws and it slips. And that was at 1190. Last one was 1390. I didn't change the section of rope that far. The last one was here. This one's here. So you can see both tests in the rope. All right, we've changed the rope to see if it was the rope. This is a Twaron jacketed. Twaron's a fiber that's used for high heat. It's 11 millimeter this time around, not 12. We're going to see if we have anything different to add with the stretch, with the way the jaws grip, with what it does to the jacket. I don't have any straight polyester jacket. This is a combination Twaron and polyester. I may put some static rope in this. I'll have a look. It'll be approaching the limits of any static rope we have. So I might have some Diablo from Marlowe. This is a Marlowe Twaron sailing rope. It was a special rope that I got a hold of for a high heat application. I'm just going to see how it runs with the jaws and what it does. Again, it's SK99 core with a 50-50 jacket with Twaron, and it's got polyester. It's very similar to the Twin Runner, but it's a Marlowe product, and we'll see if the jacket fares any better. Clamps are at 30 Newton meters, and we'll give it a try and see what we get. All right? Okay, we're pulling. This is 11 millimeter rope. And notice up, it's slipped at 955 on 11 mil rope. Once it's slipped, it'll still pull through. Here's the last test, folks. We're going to do one. It's a static, polyester jacketed static, and we've loaded it up to 50 kilonewtons, or kilograms. We're going to keep pulling and see. I don't have high expectations on this. It's stretching quite a bit, as you see. $915, and we desheathed it at 1,000 kilograms.